Hello, I'm Hannah from HannahsTreeTimes, and me and Martin here will show you how to make a wreath today. Wreaths are obviously very seasonal in the festive period, but they are also an ancient symbol in many cultures for protection and joy and other things. And they just happen to be a really good introductory project for working with willow, because you get to know the material and how it responds and how you tweak it in such a way that you're happy with the product in the end. So all sorts of materials can be used that are freshly cut and a little bit mellowed. Here we've got wild willow, various types of wild willow. This red stuff is dogwood. There is anything that's long and traily like brambles, ivy is fantastic. And you can see 3 wreaths here, or stacks of wreaths that have been made. This is green willow, basket making willow, this one. This is red dogwood, and this is peeled willow, which is basket making willow that is called buff willow. And we're going to today work with dogwood and buff willow. So in terms of tools, this is super simple. You want some secateurs that are reasonably sharp, and scissors and bits of string, in case you need to secure your wreath while it dries out. And having a small screwdriver, or in this case a bodkin, which is a specific basket making tool, is really handy if you want to make ties at the end on your wreath.
So where did you get this from?
So these specific ones I got in Lancaster from Scotch Quarry Park, but you find them in industrial estates. There's a great spot near EK Breaks, for instance. You often find dogwood planted around hospitals or university campuses. There's a lot of sources. I've also got some fantastically long hazel. That's a great one for length, because the longer your material, the bigger your wreath can be.
And do you do anything between like picking it, cutting it, and where it is now?
Yeah, great question. So yes, they have to be conditioned a bit. If I use them from dried, so I've got some previous year's material that I've soaked here, then I have to re-soak it, and that's a foot of length needs a day of soaking. So if they're 4 foot long, they need 4 days of soaking. Bathtub is ideal. And these ones, ideally you cut them, depending on where you dry them. If you dry them outside, probably 5 or 6 weeks beforehand. If you've got them inside, they will dry a lot quicker. So they need to get just a little bit wrinkly, but the tips need to be still very supple. So you don't want the tips to be already so dry that they're going to break. So you just mellow, it's called mellowing, you just mellow them a little bit so they start shrinking. Otherwise your wreath would get really wobbly afterwards when it dries. So we are now going to use the 4 longest rods that you can find. Well, the 2 first ones need to be really long, so by bashing the whole bundle on the floor like this, they're going to be pretty much where they need to be. This one's standing out, and then we've got sort of these ones here that are similar length. So if we just pull these out and check them for quality. I'll take that from you.
What makes a quality
rod?
rod?
So I would say the first ones want to be really long and knot-free, which is where this hazel, for instance, excels in. If you have ones with a lot of branches, side branches, I would leave those till later, so we'll put that one to the side. If it's tiny branches, it's probably okay, but bigger branches is tricky. And this one is lovely, but it's a very wavy shape, and for the wreath I would prefer to start with the really straight ones. So if you get yourself the longest one and put the other ones here next to you, and I get a long one as well. The first thing to make the rod really supple and willing to be doing what we want it to do, which is essentially curl up, is we're going to use our knee and just slide it over our knee, especially the thick end, which is called the butt end. So each rod has a butt end and a tip end, which is the very tip. So you take the rod in your left hand, the butt end in your left hand, and you make a wide arc. and you leave enough overlap so that the tip would go half around the circle again. And then because it's gone over here, you take the tip like a needle and you go under and through, and then you repeat that under and through. It's a bit like sewing.
Is this good?
Yeah, that's looked good. Great. And now don't worry that this is gonna want to flip out. If you can hold it while you get the next rod, that's great. Then the next rod gets the same treatment over the knee. In fact, you could do all 4 first rods before you start making it. And then we're pretending we're sellotaping these together, starting with the butt end where the tip end is. We're bringing it from the front behind, leaving a little bit sticking out, but going in the same direction. And again, we take the tip of the rod like a needle and thread, and we feed it through because it's gone over here. It needs to now go under and through. And we repeat this step over, under and through. Over, under and through, as long as your rod will allow you to do so. So take the tip end and always feed it through by the tip end. That's it, great. So rod number 3 and 4, we're thinking of a circle being cut into quarters. So you started one here, you started one here. So the next one is going to go, if we have 6 o'clock and 12 o'clock, we now want 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock. Again, starting your rod in the same direction, coming from the front, feeding behind, leaving a little bit sticking out, and then keeping going with the flow, remembering to use the tip and always feed the tip through. And usually people feel a little bit frustrated at the beginning because it tends to look egg-shaped and be a bit wobbly. That's perfectly normal, especially when you work with fresh material. Right, here's your number 4. Starting at whichever quarter you haven't given a butt end yet. So you've got
Yeah,
one
we've
here.
got a button here.
Okay, yeah, in there. So you've got 4 rods in, so if we go to say 7 or so, it's
So where do I start this one? Do I start like
So
in
now-
between?
Yeah, you can start in between or you can just have a feel. So this area looks particularly wobbly to me.
Okay.
So I would probably feed a butt end in here to get this out of being slightly pointy and more rounded. So if somebody has the problem that everything totally unravels at this point, or at an earlier point, what you can do is you can use temporary ties and just really tightly put these in place to help you like an extra pair of hands. And obviously before your wreath goes on the table or outside or gets given to someone, you cut these, so you need to let it dry before. And you can probably soon start shaping and tweaking it so it looks more rounded.
Okay.
Yours is pretty good. So with the wreaths, it's really important to try and keep a flow where they fall into a general swooping pattern. It happens that people make very, very tight curves and then it looks something like this. So you can see that's a lot tighter than the swoops before, which can look really lovely, like a different stitch when you work with fabric, and you could go the opposite direction to cross it over. But it can also be that it happens not by decision, but just by accident, and then people can get really frustrated. So if that happens, either you do another one, or you don't worry too much and you make it a deliberate weave. There is something called the random weave. So this wreath has been made with a bit of random weave, and you can see how it's going a bit all over the place. And some have been deliberately placed the opposite way. So if I go the opposite way, before that I was working from left to right. So I would now insert a rod from right to left. and that will result in the eye immediately seeing the different weave pattern. There you go, so that's a very different way of flow. So both ways are totally fine, and both ways can look really cool. It's just good to decide, okay, something went pear-shaped, I'm going to make a random wreath now, or if you really want to practice the generous swoop and this flow pattern, you always have to work from left to right. I really love that you managed to put all the butt ends at the back, because then it's got a clear front and a clear back, and once we've cut all of these, it's going to look really neat from the front.
I definitely did that on purpose.
Good, I like that. So where will you put your last one or two in?
I'm kind of just, at this stage, it's kind of, there's no bit that seems more wobbly than any other.
Okay.
So I'm kind of just doing it where there isn't necessarily an end sticking out.
Great, yeah, seems a sound plan.
So, yeah.
And at this point we don't need more rods to make it structurally stable. We just go by aesthetics. So if Martin wants a bigger wreath, he'll just keep adding in some rods. And obviously if you aim for a big wreath, choose rods with a thick butt end, which dogwood is really good for. So you can just keep going way over to 10 rods if you want a nice substantial wreath. And then yeah, just as Martin is doing, you can use your knee as well and just tweak it so it gives a nice rounded shape. And is that pretty much how you want it?
Looks good to me.
Good, great. So we need to have a think about trimming things. So what usually happens is that people have some tip ends picking out. They don't need to be cut at this length. They can be tucked in. Either you find a space with your fingers or you use a little screwdriver or something. And then you make a bit of a space and you just gently tuck them in. And when I remove the screwdriver or bodkin, the gap closes and it forces the tips to stay in, and anything that's then still protruding can be cut. With the butt ends, we do need to cut those. I would advise, in a case of Martin's, which is made of really fresh material, to let it dry first before you cut it to the last cut. And what you want to do is you have to see the outline of your wreath, and you want to give a slanted cut that leaves as much of the rod sticking out as possible. So from that side you don't see it, but from the other side, I'm not cutting it here or in the middle, I'm trying to cut it on the outline. Okay? And if you stuck all your butt ends behind like Martin did, then it should be fine. You should have a really clean front. So in your case, you can tuck those bits in. Tuck those bits in, and that one as well. Yeah, and then with you, I would probably with this wreath just, cut it to well above what is necessary and let it dry first. So if you take it inside now and have it dry for 2 or so weeks, you'll see it shrink and get a bit more wobbly. And then you can use some temporary ties now, or we can do a willow tie. Should we do a willow tie?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Great. So we're going to put a tie around this wreath. That's totally optional, you don't have to do that, and it's a little tricky. This is a spacer that we will need, and then we need thin rods that are of really good quality, and we'll probably need 2 or 3 because the first 2 might not work. Maybe they might. Really prepare them for the job, which is a lot of tight curving around. So we start with the butt end of the rod and we put a spacer in. The spacer will be taken out later. And I hold the 2 sticks with my left hand. Again, needle and thread. I'm going to have to go under and through. And it's pretty much like with ropes, Martin, which I know you do climbing, so you know all about that. You want to take the rod back over itself so it secures itself. And then you just keep looping it around really tightly. As long as it will allow. And then you just need to feed the tip end through where your spacer is. So that spacer can now come out. At this point we might need pliers. I'm probably okay here, but if you've done a good job and wrapped really tightly, which is advisable, then the spacer will come out with a bit of difficulty, and you just feed the tip end back into the groove, the channel that the spacer has left, and then you pull it really tight. Oops, and if it rips, it should be inside hopefully. And then that's a tie that will hold everything together. So if you've got sticky out bits at some point, like here, I could cut them a little shorter and then put a tie around it and nobody would notice.
So we're doing this because it's going to dry out and we want it to keep together, is that right?
You can do it for that. You can just use it as an accent as well, you know.
Okay.
It's something that's distinctly different in the weave, so it can be an accent. So you do it on the back, that's great.
Yeah. So holding those together.
Yeah.
And then is this going...
And then this needs to go whichever way round, it doesn't matter, okay, so long as you use the tip end.
Yep.
And go back over itself. And you have to put them really close together and pull tight, yep, all along so that you keep the tension. And it can be handy to have a second pair of hands here. Yeah, remembering the needle and thread, so you try to work as much as possible with the tip end. And you've actually got a really bad tip. I'll cut it shorter in a moment. For feeding through, I mean. So any rod that's got insect damage or something will reveal that at this point, and it will probably just break in this point. So then you just take a fresh rod. It doesn't matter to do it a few times. That's looking lovely. Yeah, right. Leave it there because your tip is funny. So I'm just going to cut it, otherwise you're not going to get it through. And let's find your spacer, and you pull the spacer out. Great. And then you get your tip and feed it through where it was, ideally. Yeah. And obviously greenery can be added. Traditionally wreaths were done with greenery as well. There's often a willow or a straw inner and then greenery added. The greenery usually being the symbol of eternal life, spring coming back, these kind of things. Ivy is great. If you get long trailing bits of ivy, it's really great to add that in, and you do the same swooping rhythm. And a few other materials that I've worked with on this little basket, just to show that it will do the same. So this is heather, that was honeysuckle, and this was birch. So birch is really good as well. But anything that produces long straight shoots, bramble is somewhere in here too. We'll do a really few more uses of wreaths. So you can make tiny wreaths and put ribbon around them. They can be Christmas decorations for the Christmas tree. They can be really lovely with, this isn't like fully decked out, but you know, you can make stars or add other things in and have ribbons of all sorts of colours and balls and decorations. There is no end to the creativity there. A really simple thing for wreaths when you don't want them around Christmas time but afterwards in the spring is to make a perennial plant support. So here I've just stuck some sturdy twigs through for cross pieces. And then if in springtime, you can either have uprights going through, just open a bit in the weave and put your upright through. And then when things like alchemilla or delphinium or, you know, any plant that needs that has the tendency to flop as it grows bigger. Before it's all big, you let it grow through here and it'll be kept in the griddle, and it looks really sightly, much nicer I think than the plastic coated wires that you traditionally get, and it's very quick to knock up. There's the traditional, this is a slightly moth-eaten dream catcher lacking a feather in the middle. Dream catchers, another thing that's made on a hoop or a wreath. Traditional platter, I think it's also called a Catalan platter, is entirely made on a wreath with some cross pieces to give more ribs, and then you just weave length of stick through. So lots of ways of how wreaths can be used. So you've made 2 wreaths, how did you find it?
It was good. Yeah, so that one also we did together, which is good. We've left those longer because it's going to loosen, and I can recut those later.
And you have to remember to take the tie out, temporary tie.
Yep. And then this one, there's another one I did. This is kind of like a mix, which some of the material felt a bit easier to go with.
You've used the buff willow, that's the willow without the bark on. How did you find that? Some people like it and some people don't like it.
I found it good. Some places it has got little kinks in it.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering if I was really worried about that, could you like tie it to reinforce it, or would you not worry?
Yeah, the kink won't go away. You could put a lovely ribbon over it.
Yeah,
or
it's kind of easily hidden.
another one of those willow ties.
Yeah.
That's the best for hiding. Or greenery.
Yeah. But yeah, this one ended up being quite circular quite quickly.
Yeah.
And this one we kind of just shaped as we went.
Yeah, they feel really sturdy.
Yeah, it feels good. It's
Great.
definitely satisfying when it's nice and rigid, when
Wonderful.
you think like how flexible they are initially.
Yeah, yeah. Starting from a wonky egg and coming out with a solid circle. Thanks for watching, and don't give up if the first one doesn't work. Just keep going. After 3 or 4, you'll be really experienced. Enjoy the process and enjoy foraging.